you to everyone who is joining us live on Facebook and YouTube for tonight's At the Table event. We will be getting started in about 30 seconds. Thank you again to everyone who is joining us for At the Table with Laura Washington and Lynn Sweet, our Sun-Times political show. Here is Laura Washington.
Happy New Year in 2022. We have a stellar lineup for you tonight on both the local and national scene. We spoke earlier today with Jonathan Karl of ABC News for a look at President Joe Biden's first year in office. Later, we're going to hear from two top political observers on the growing competition in the Illinois gubernatorial race and much, much more. But first, I want to tell you that in 2022, the Chicago Sun-Times is poised to be bigger and better than ever. That's why we have big plans. We always have big plans to bring it all to you, no matter where you are. We have a great offer. If you subscribe to the Sun-Times now, you'll get the new Sun-Times e-paper. That's a daily digital replica of the print product that lives at paper.suntimes.com. And you could get unlimited access to both the e-paper and every story on suntimes.com for only $2.49 a month. You can't beat that, $2.49 a month. So be sure to check it out at suntimes.com/subscribe. And now to our At the Table co-host, Chicago Sun-Times Washington Bureau Chief Lynn Sweet, who will introduce our first guest. Lynn.
Thank you, Laura. Joining us now is Jonathan Karl. He's the chief Washington correspondent for ABC News and the co-anchor of This Week with George Stephanopoulos. John, who I've known for years, has covered every beat in the Capitol, the White House, Congress, the Pentagon, the State Department, and somehow he finds time to write bestsellers in between, including The Front Row at the Trump Show and his new book, BETRAYAL, the final act of the Trump Show. So, John, we're speaking on the very anniversary of Biden's first year in office, but it's also the anniversary of Trump's first active year out of office. Your book, BETRAYAL, reports on how Trump laid the groundwork to deny the election results, in a sense foreshadowing how Trump has been able to amplify his big lie. You're right. And near the end, we now live in a nation where a large part of the population does not trust our elections. There are many reasons for this, but none greater than Donald Trump and the lies he told about the 2020 election. Question: how much did Trump's first post-presidential year cast a shadow on Biden's first year?
Well, Biden from the very start, Lynn, had to deal with that shadow. I mean, he came into office with a very bold agenda for his first 100 days, trying to be a little FDR-like. And what did he have to face immediately? Was an impeachment trial in the Senate. You know, of course, remember that dominated much of the news coverage of Washington during the first weeks of the Biden presidency. So from the very beginning, he's had to kind of deal with Trump. He's rarely mentioned him by name, as you know. He has really tried to keep the focus elsewhere. And look, he's had huge issues to confront that have, you know, that mostly Trump is irrelevant to it at this point. You know, he had to deal obviously with his plans to get out of Afghanistan and the mess created on the way out. He now is, you know, entirely owns the COVID response, and we've had the new variants. We've had massive challenges. He's had challenges with Congress, with Democrats. So he's had a lot else to think about besides Donald Trump. But that shadow of Donald Trump, of course, is always there.
Well, in a sense, even on Wednesday night, when the Democrats in the Senate couldn't get their 50 votes together to pass the voting rights bill, would it, in a sense, that we even needed the urgency of the voting rights bill that the Democrats don't seem to be able to pass right now? Isn't that, in a sense, also a legacy of the big lie getting traction?
It sure is, and it's more than just the big lie. It's the way Trump has used this lie that the election was stolen to go by methodically on a state by state effort where Republicans have control, to go state by state to make changes to the voting laws, to curtail things like mail-in voting and early voting, but also more profoundly, and I think more disturbing, to try to put in place officials who will do his bidding. One of the kind of one of the central themes to me of 2020 and the lead up to January 6th was that you had a series of local officials, not all of them local officials, but many local officials, statewide officials in the key states that were being contested, who were Republicans who stood up to Donald Trump and went and did their due diligence. They had recounts, they had audits, but they refused to do his bidding and to overturn the will of the voters in their states. I mean, obviously, Brad Raffensperger in Georgia is kind of the most high profile of these, but the Republicans who serve on the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors in Arizona, the Michigan Republican state legislative leaders, leaders in Pennsylvania as well, who stood up for the principle that elections need to be entirely nonpartisan in how they're conducted. Campaigns are entirely partisan, but the conduct of the elections needs to be something that where partisanship doesn't come into play. And Trump's trying to change that. And that's why Democrats are so feels that it's a matter of survival of our democracy. In some of them say. Well, Biden, frankly, that they have a federal effort to combat what's going on in the states.
Well, given that, John, and that federal effort is ongoing, and it's kind of been kind of tough sledding on that front. But how dangerous is this threat to the electoral politics going forward? How concerned should voters be about it?
I think we need to be very concerned. I mean, one of the central themes of betrayal is that Trump's efforts to overturn the election came dangerously close to succeeding. I think much closer to succeeding than most people realized at the time, and that it was, the kind of brave actions of a relative handful of mostly Republican officials, including judges, by the way, some of them Trump-appointed judges, that stood up to this effort. Trump's effort trying to erode that, so that might not happen next time. But there's another thing. And this is what I was getting at, and what Lynn and what you read, is that as these changes are made at the state level, and as the effort to get a federal voting rights bill fails, not only do you have Republicans having no faith, not all of them obviously, but a lot of Republicans having no faith in our elections, largely because of the lies Donald Trump has said, but you've got a good chunk of Democrats who are not going to trust the next election. And you can't have a functioning democracy if people don't trust that at the end of the day the votes will be counted and cast in a way that is fair and honest and transparent.
Well, that's why, in a sense, I see what happened last night when Senators Manchin and Sinema wouldn't allow that temporary blocking of the filibuster to allow some changes in federal law that could enforce the voting, enforce parts of the Voting Rights Act that was struck down. The point is, though, that Biden is coming into the midterms having to confront this reality. Also, by the way, he had this record-long press conference yesterday.
Oh my God, that was amazing, wasn't it?
54 minutes. Just so our listeners know, that is the record longest by many minutes of anything Trump or Obama did. And of course, this is one of the themes that came in and out of it. But do you have a sense, by the way, of what the Biden play might be given the context that we're talking about? Trump's big lie has saturated the electorate in a stunning way. And let me back up a minute. since you have been observing Trump for years and you're one of the leading Trumpologists, can you explain and analyze the power he has to quickly be able to infiltrate the political consciousness for some people in this utterly persuasive way, and that this is sticking in his post-presidency?
I mean, it is remarkable that he has this hold on Republican voters, and it's so unusual because, as you know, the well-established pattern tradition is that when a president leaves the White House, whether because the second term is up or they've been defeated, or in the case of Richard Nixon, they've resigned, they kind of disappear. And, they may go out and do things. Jimmy Carter did all his humanitarian work. George W. Bush took up painting. Barack Obama's going to do Netflix or whatever he's going to do. And, he's got the big plans for the library in Chicago. Richard Nixon went out and worked on his memoirs. The idea of a former president being from almost the get-go here, directly trying to be the kingmaker in the party is just something we haven't seen.
Oh, right.
And to be second guessing his successor on a regular basis. So he does have this kind of mythic hold. But Lynn, I think there is some evidence that hold is loosening at least a bit. One thing I thought was interesting just yesterday, John Bolton, his former national security advisor turned huge Trump critic, obviously, released some polls that he had commissioned, suggesting that the number of Republican voters defining themselves as Trump Republicans has declined, and that Trump's overall favorability rating among Republicans, while still overwhelmingly majority think highly of him, that number's declining. And we're going to have a series of primaries over the next few months where candidates who have been endorsed enthusiastically by Donald Trump may or may not win. And I think we'll have a little bit of a sense of just whether or not, just what clothes the emperor is actually wearing here.
And actually in Illinois, we have a really good example. We have one congressional district where two incumbents, Republicans, are pitted against each other. Rodney Davis, and who is a fixture in the Capitol, you probably know and have covered through the years, and a freshman, Mary Miller, who is in the Marjorie Taylor Greene wing of the Republican Party, and Trump has endorsed her. So Laura and I will be watching that carefully through the election season leading up to our June primary. Laura, now I know you had.
How does it look? And how do you assess that race?
Well, Rodney Davis it's a central to downstate Illinois district. And I have to give Davis a running start because he's been in some big bruising election battles in the past against Democrats. The district he's in now in the remap is safe Republican, but before this, the Dems thought they could take him out. And so he's been in big races. His name is out. He did prevail against two big pushes by Democrats to get him out. So as he likes to say, Democrats have spent millions of dollars getting his name pushed out. So he's just better known. And we'll see how. I'm waiting for the fundraising numbers. She did pretty good as a grassroots fundraiser using the Trump, appealing to the Trump base. But he's got a lock on a lot of. But anyway, going back to, so actually, this is like a big deal, little laboratory example.
Yeah, no, it is.
Yeah, I think it's a real litmus test, Lynn. I think you're right to see it in Illinois it's a really important state to watch. In terms of before we move on, though, I wanted to pick up on John what you said about this poll and how about it might appear that Trump's grip may be loosening a bit on the Republican base. If that's the case, and we don't know if there's a trend yet, what do you think might be behind that? Why might that be happening now?
I think it's his single-minded focus on 2020, looking squarely in the past. And I think Republicans sense a real opportunity with Joe Biden's vulnerabilities, his, obviously near historically low approval rating for a president at the end of the first year, with anxiety in the country about the economy. The Republicans feel they have a real opportunity to take back the House, maybe take back the Senate. And, Trump is focused on talking about an election that was in the past. And, one other bigger maybe litmus test is Trump has been beating the drum to get rid of Mitch McConnell as the Republican leader. Now for over a year. McConnell's still there. You did have Lindsey Graham come out and say, he's not sure he's going to support him, and he needs the next leader needs to be a Trump Republican essentially. So we'll see what happens to Mitch McConnell. But the fact that Mitch McConnell can say what he has said about Donald Trump, and that Donald Trump can savagely attack him and say he should be gone, and he's just marching along, he's doing his thing, I think that certainly among those Republicans that are kind of, call them Republican operatives, that are working on the campaign to take back the Congress, they know that they cannot, or they believe they cannot antagonize Trump. They need the energy that he brings in, some of the fundraising he brings in for sure. But they also think that the message that he's giving could get in the way of winning some of these races.
Well, you mentioned Mitch McConnell, and Joe Biden took a big hit at Mitch McConnell yesterday in his remarkable press conference. What's your assessment of how that press conference went for him yesterday? It was very important, rolling up the anniversary of his first year in office. How did he do it? How much good did he do himself yesterday?
First of all, we believe he did break the record. I talked to you guys all know Martha Kumar, who kind of tracks all the stats on presidential press conferences, and she believes it's a record. It's hard to say because we don't have the times for all that, but I think the number 2 press conference was one in 1996 that Bill Clinton did, where Mike McCurry was off on the side as press secretary, telling him stop. It kept on going. Usually a long rambling press conference is not good for a president. I actually thought, though, Biden got better towards the end. The last 40 minutes of that press conference were better than the first 40 minutes. When he goes out there and they try to tell him exactly who to call on and what order, he's reading the names. When he's out there just kind of being himself, he's looser. Look, I think there was one significant problem in that press conference, and that was what he said about Ukraine.
Oh, yeah.
And, in suggesting that a minor incursion, a little invasion might not be a big, might not bring the same response as a major invasion. Now, that's probably true, by the way. He was probably telling the truth, but you can't have the president of the United States appear to give a green light to Vladimir Putin to make a, quote, minor incursion.
Right, and that sent off flares in Kiev.
Yeah, it sure did. Yeah.
And it also showed, I thought, that Biden really didn't have the pulse locked in of what he thought our NATO allies were going to do, because part of what the Biden administration has been trying to do is speak in one voice with NATO on Ukraine. But so was there cleanup in aisle 4 afterwards?
There's certainly an effort. We saw Kamala Harris go on the morning shows trying to do some cleanup on that. But it was, the other thing that was striking about that is you heard Joe Biden talking about the divisions in NATO. And again, if he's like Joe Biden, the analyst, if he's, if that was Lynn Sweet saying that, that'd be fine. It's actually true. The NATO's not all on the same page about how to respond to Putin. But you don't have the president kind of openly musing, well, we're not really unified on this, but we'd be really unified on that. It's just, it was just kind of surprising because obviously Biden's a foreign policy pro. The guy was basically the Congress's ambassador to the world, as the Senate Foreign Relations chairman for all those years. Maybe all that knowledge kind of got in the way, and he forgot he was speaking as the commander in chief and not as a foreign policy expert.
Well, and I think this came up as one of the questions that came out of the press conference yesterday was, is he losing it? Is he? Does he have issues? And there's polls out that say a lot of voters think he does. What do you think about that question?
Well, look, I think that was a question that was asked by James Rosen, formerly of Fox News, now of Newsmax, somebody I think we all know well over the years. And it was a very uncomfortable question to hear asked. But the answer was probably the best answer that Biden gave in the press conference. It was like, I have no idea. And he moved right on. For him to speak for 2 hours, almost 2 hours, and truly get into the weeds on some of this stuff, it was hard to watch that. You might question the performance overall and how effective it was politically for him. But it did not look like somebody that had lost it, to speak bluntly. I mean, he's clearly capable of thinking through the major issues. But yeah, people do have, look, Biden is a guy that from a young age had a problem stuttering, as we know, and sometimes you see him work through that even now. And a lot of people see that and interpret that as somebody who's lost a step or several steps. And I think it is something he has to address more, not necessarily by answering a question like that one, but by demonstrating that he's a guy that is quite comfortable, even at the age of 78, thinking on his feet.
So looking at the year ahead, the voting rights is not going to happen right now. He said, this was interesting at the press conference, he thinks he could break up Build Back Better and get something passed. So is year 2 going into the midterms going to be the year in bite-sized chunks instead of big Building Back Better? Is it building back best we can?
Building back with little bites. Yeah. I mean, he's not going to get any massive another multi-trillion-dollar efforts through Congress again. And to his credit, he's entirely correct. He did pass 2 of the biggest bills that even adjusted for inflation we've ever seen. The COVID relief bill, the infrastructure. These are huge. Right.
So if they didn't try to raise expectations so much, Jonathan, it would have been more of a pure, messaging point. We did American Rescue Plan, big. Infrastructure, big.
Yeah.
States are flooded with money, cities, county flooded. So is this just a flaw of all the White House people who do this, that they just thought they had to raise hope so much, especially with the base, on things that they knew or should have known would be hard to deliver?
I mean, part of it's it's a Democratic Party writ large, not necessarily White House staff, but you had progressives in Congress literally referring to this $1 trillion+ infrastructure bill as crumbs. Like, we're not just going to take the crumbs. I remember one of the progressive House members saying.
I was with Mayor Lori Lightfoot in Washington on Wednesday. She's here for the Conference of Mayors. Mm-hmm. And she was talking to me when we were chatting about how much money is getting to Chicago from federal Washington. It is historic.
I mean, New York's talking about, surpluses, the New York State government. When does that ever happen? Andrew Cuomo's thinking, why did I leave?
Right. One of the reasons some blue chip Republican establishment people in Illinois decided not to run against Governor Pritzker is because they were going to run on the lousy state finances, and now they can't because there's so much federal money. I forgot to add, I think there are 3 big things that Biden did accomplish as we speak on his anniversary: American Rescue Plan, the infrastructure bill, and a really big number of judges. And they are historic picks because for the first time you have diversity in race and gender, and public defenders have been in the pipeline. Am I missing anything, Jonathan and Laura?
No, and these are significant accomplishments, no question. And if you listen to Biden yesterday, you got the sense that he thinks that maybe the biggest problem, his biggest flaw, was not selling them as aggressively and telling people about them. I don't think it's quite that simple. I mean, there is anxiety in the country. Inflation is at an all-time, not an all-time high, but near an all-time high, and he talked about how for the first time American workers got a raise, referring to the real wage growth, which was significant, and that's true, but it also wasn't as much as the inflation rate. So how real was it to most people? And it's and there have been clear stumbles, and I think that on one hand, Afghanistan and raised questions about competence, also national security, but about these were the top experts. These are the people that the Trump people are gone. Now we're the people that really know what they're doing. And then you see the disaster that unfolded in Kabul. And then on COVID, which was the thing that he from the start had the highest approval rating on, and even a lot of Republicans, thinking that he had the right approach. And you see the kind of mess over testing and the mess over messaging coming out of the CDC. So there have been some significant stumbles, but major accomplishments as well.
Well, I would want to pick up on a couple of things, and the whole issue with Afghanistan, of course, is front and center, and then of course Ukraine as well. But I guess the question is how much domestic versus international issues will play in terms of voters' concerns this year, and that remains to be seen. I wanted to segue to a couple of things that we sort of touched on. One is Kamala Harris. As you mentioned, she was doing the talk shows today to sort of do some cleanup work for Biden. Is that her job to be the cleanup lady? And there have been a lot of debate over how the White House is using her and how they're deploying her. And a lot of her supporters would say they're deploying her more often for the dirty work, like what I just referred to, as opposed to productive work that can help advance her as a politician and as a vice president.
Well, there's a storied history of vice presidents being given the thankless tasks. So, you could certainly argue she's been given first of all, issues where it's nearly impossible, if not impossible, to show progress. I mean, she was given the voting rights portfolio. That's not going to change the fact that they didn't have the votes and they weren't going to have the votes. And she was given the border. An intransigent problem if there ever was one. But sometimes. First of all, I thought it was very interesting that he actually got asked, and it's a question a lot of people have been asking, would she be on the ticket? I mean, I've always assumed, of course, if Biden runs, he's not going to ditch Kamala Harris. I mean, that would be a whole series of other problems. Even if you think that she's not the strongest vice president, you can't do that without raising all kinds of questions about why you chose her and you've betrayed her. And I mean, it'd be just a mess. And no Democrats are out there beating the drums to get rid of Kamala Harris. But, so the fact that he was asked, but he gave, again, probably the second best answer of that press conference was, Harris, the interesting question, and it's fascinating, actually, that in both parties, the Democratic and Republican parties, you have this, the two looming figures, Biden and Trump, and there's a real possibility that neither one of them actually runs for re-election. I mean, Biden has said he intends to, but he's also said, who knows what, he's talked about fate. He hasn't said it's a definite. He hasn't, filed papers to run yet, all that kind of stuff. And Trump, I actually don't think is going to run. A lot of people think he is going to run, but there's certainly uncertainty about that. And how different does the world look if neither one of them is running in 2024? Why don't you think Kamala Harris then becomes a candidate for president for the Democratic nomination, and it will not be handed to her. She will have to fight for that.
It'll be a dogfight. But why do you think that Trump's not going to run?
I think, again, that he's focused so on 2020. He doesn't seem like he's a guy focused on 2024 or even 2022. I think that he enjoys life in Mar-a-Lago or Bedminster during the summer, being the kind of kingmaker and calling all the shots. Running for president is a grind. He knows that. He did it before. I'm not so sure, reading him, that he wants to do that again. And I also think that maybe the biggest reason of all is that he has a real fear of losing. I mean, clearly he couldn't acknowledge he lost in 2020. And I don't think that he wants to face the possibility of losing again. And however weak you think Joe Biden is, Trump's got some real, is absolutely toxic among independent voters. So as popular as he is among Republicans, he lost by 7 million votes last time, and then January 6th happened. So,
and we also have out there the New York investigations of his
sure.
business going on. Who knows if that will lead to indictments? His top associate already has been indicted. So we just have some more twists and turns of the investigations against him. We're in our closing minutes, and we have, as your book foreshadowed, you kind of laid the predicate of what led up to January 6th, and we have the January 6th commission going on. As we speak, the commission just won a big victory in the Supreme Court to get some of Trump's papers or records for that day. What is the thing that you think is most important for the January 6th committee to find out or just lock into place, if nothing else, for history?
First of all, I think that the Supreme Court rejecting Trump's efforts to keep his documents secret is hugely significant and will open up an entire new window on what was going on in the White House. We're going to see what Trump has tried to keep from seeing, the visitor logs, who was coming to the White House, who was calling him. We're going to see the communications with his aides. They've asked for video and photographic records. Trump always had a photographer around him. I don't know if there was a photographer inside the White House taking pictures on January 6th, but I assume there was. There were the video outtakes of that video message he gave on January 6th in the evening. Very interesting to see. This is all material that the committee should be getting now that the Supreme Court has paved the way. So I think it's very significant. But I think the most important thing they can do is to hold high-profile public hearings with people who you and I, Lynn and Laura, we know what these people have said, but people haven't actually seen in front of the cameras at a witness table Bill Barr, the Attorney General, the Trump loyalist, come out and say it's all bullshit. All of those are his words. Excuse me, family programming, but those were his words to me. In an interview, which I wrote about and I wrote in my book. That's one thing. To see him say it, somebody with the gravitas of Barr, the respected Barr commands among Trump voters, say that, I think is hugely significant. To see John Kelly, we all know what John Kelly has said and how much of a threat he thinks, Trump is. But Kelly's done precious few interviews and no real major sit down in front of the camera to say what he has said. He's a guy. Retired four-star Marine general. He was Trump's chief of staff. He was the Secretary of Homeland Security. He did all of Trump's bidding on the border. This is not some squishy liberal. Put him out there and have him talk about how he thinks Trump became a threat to the United States. I think those events, even though the actual news, we know what those people think now, but we've never seen them in a huge public forum with the eyes of the nation on it. Saying that these are people that can speak to Republicans, not just, to the echo chamber that's watching the non-Fox cable news channels. So I think that may be the most important thing they can do. I mean, who knows? These documents may reveal, some kind of a big smoking gun. I wouldn't hold your breath for that. I think they're going to be very interesting. But the public hearings, people that were close to Trump, people who are not, Democrats. This is not Adam Schiff. This is John Kelly, Bill Barr, and then I would put less high profile, but I think potentially very strong in a forum like this. Those Republican state leaders, conservative Republicans, who said what Trump was saying is just not true.
Well,
that'll have an impact, I think.
And with that, we do know that whatever the committee does, they've got to get it done this year because there's the risk of losing the House.
Oh, yeah.
And that will be the first thing out. Anyway, Jonathan Karl, thank you so much for joining us. John is the author of Betrayal, the Final Act of the Trump Show. Thank you so much for joining us. Stay tuned for our next segment where we do a deep dive into local politics.
Laura and Lynn, thank you very much.
Great having you. Local politics, Lynn, yes, indeed. And there was plenty of action this week on that front. And to help us break it down, we have two stellar friends who we both know well and have worked with for a long time, Delmarie Cobb and Dave McKinney. First, I'm going to give some brief introductions, and then we're going to get right into it. Delmarie Cobb is the proprietor of the Publicity Works, a public affairs, political consulting, and media relations firm. Among her many roles, Delmarie has served as the Illinois press secretary for the presidential bid of Hillary Clinton in 2016. In 1988, she was national traveling press secretary to presidential candidate Reverend Jesse Jackson. And in 1996, she became the first African-American press secretary to the Democratic National Convention. Tonight, we're going to talk with her about the recently retired Bobby Rush, who is leaving his first congressional district after 30 years. Welcome, Delmarie.
Thank you.
And we also have another old friend, and that's Dave McKinney, state politics reporter at WBEZ. Dave is a longtime former colleague of ours at the Chicago Sun-Times, where he spent 19 years as a Springfield bureau chief with additional stops at Reuters and the Daily Herald. His work has also appeared in Crain's Chicago Business, the New York Times, and Chicago Magazine. In 2014, the Washington Post named Dave one of the nation's best state house reporters. He's won many other local and national honors over many years, and he has excellent reporting to speak to Illinois politics, all things politics in Illinois, politics and government. Welcome, Dave.
Laura, thanks for such a lead up there. That's
Right. The show is done. Thank you for joining us.
Lynn, good to see you. Delmarie, how are you?
Yes,
Fine. How are you doing?
Dave McKinney
right.
show. Yes.
Nice to get the gang together. And so I want to start with Bobby Rush, as I mentioned earlier, Delmarie. He's retiring after 30 years, a storied political career, former Black Panther, Chicago alderman, longtime member of the congressional delegation to Illinois. In fact, he's currently the dean of the congressional delegation, community-based pastor. And he's leaving, and there's a slew of people that want to take his place. But Delmarie, you've worked with him directly, and you worked with him in his run for the first congressional district. So I'd like to just hear a little bit more about your working relationship with him, and what is the big thing that we need to know about his legacy as he leaves office?
Well, I did do his first campaign in 1992 for Congress. And at the time, he wasn't supposed to run. Charlie Hayes was in office. He was the incumbent, and Charlie had said that he was only going to run one more time. And the Black community had decided, well, they were going to look for the next person to succeed Charlie. And Bobby Rush and Carolyn, his wife, and Stanley Watkins came to my office downtown and asked me, what did I think about him running? And I said, well, you know, if you don't win this time, you'll be front runner next time. He said, that's what we were thinking. Will you do my race? And I said, yes. And it was interesting because Charlie actually just ran a terrible race. But the thing that really got Bobby over the top, because it was 50-50 neck and neck. And as bad as the race was for Charlie, it was really a 50-50 race. And as I said, the Black community wasn't supporting Bobby. But at the end, if you all remember, there was a front page article in the Tribune about congressmen who were writing bad checks. And really the checks they were writing checks ahead of their own paycheck so that they would be reimbursed at the bank would, the Washington Bank or the Congressional Bank would be reimbursed. So they weren't bad checks and as we know them to be. And it just so happens that Charlie had the worst record of all. And that happened the last 2 weeks of the campaign. And that's what got Bobby over the top.
And the rest is history.
And the rest is history. And one of the things he ran on was, and he talked about it all the time, bringing bacon back to the district, bringing the bacon back. And when you look at the people whose footsteps he followed in, you're talking about, going as far back as 1915, Oscar DePriest was the alderman, but he was also the first Black congressman. And then you had Ralph Metcalf, and you had William Dawson, and you had Harold Washington. These are major people, I mean, whose profiles were larger than life. And so that's what Bobby saw himself as, someone who could follow in those kinds of footsteps and bring resources back to the district.
Well, actually, when he talked about the historic nature of the first congressional district in Chicago, which has always been anchored, a piece of it on the South Side, he also brought in our state's first Black female senator, Carol Moseley Braun, and you know who I'm going to next, President Barack Obama, who also is a product of that piece of political turf on the south side of Chicago. So here's my question, Delmarie. We have so many people running right now. Bobby picked a woman who is not well known to endorse right out of the box. Karen Norrington Reeves, she runs a Cook County and City Jobs Agency. Why did he endorse so early? Do you have an analysis? You have Pat Dahl, the alderman running. You have, we don't even know the field yet. State Senator Jacqueline Collins is circulating petitions for Congress and her Senate seat. Jamal Cole, the neighborhood activist, is there. And Reverend Jesse Jackson's son, Jonathan, is thinking about running too. Why would Rush make an endorsement for days after a almost rookie candidate ran? I say almost rookie. Karen Norrington Reeves ran for alderman in 2007. So what's your analysis?
Well, we really don't know how many people will run, because when Jesse Jr. got in trouble and stepped down, 22 people ran for that seat. So the floodgates are still open, and we don't know until the petitions get turned in exactly how many people there will be vying for that seat. But I think that Bobby made up his mind before he announced that he was stepping down. And for whatever reason, whether he has a relationship with her, that a working relationship that he's had over the years, that may be why he chose her. And I think sometimes you choose somebody not really looking at the big picture of how many people are actually going to run. And, had she been the only one running for that seat, or against the 6 who were already announced, including Jamal Cole and some other community people who were already running, then she probably had a good chance. She might have been able to ride on his coattails. But, if you look at historically, Bobby hasn't necessarily had coattails,
right.
Because his sister has run for office. His son has run for office. And so you've got to ask, what coattails does he have? I
want to put out a hypothesis there. And that is, he is more than his being a congressman, he is a minister. And this is a district where ministers are very important. But then again, if Jonathan gets in, his father is the Reverend Jesse Jackson. So what do you make of that?
So no, if you just throw everything up in the air at that point, because the whole field changes, the whole dynamics of the field changes. It will be very exciting for certain, because let's just think about what those debates and forums will be like.
They will be chaotic. Now, when I talked to Mayor Lightfoot yesterday, she's in Washington, and I asked her about these congressional races. She said she is likely to endorse in the first, probably won't in the sixth, where we have Sean Casten and Marie Newman running against each other, but that's out in the suburbs. And interestingly, she wasn't sure what she's going to do in the third district, kind of on the north side, that is designed to yield a Hispanic member of Congress. But I get why she said she wants to be actively involved in the South Side first congressional district. And I say South Side, everyone should know who we're talking to. It goes as far south as Bourbonnais on one end and Chahona on the other. It's really big, but the votes are there. So what do you think? Let me throw this out there. She will endorse in that one because this is the political turf she needs if she runs next year for re-election. And Dave, chime in on this if you have an analysis too, Laura. I mean, everybody I'm sure has some insight on this one.
Go ahead.
Well, I just don't think that her endorsement will carry a lot of weight.
Really?
And I think, why would it? I mean, she has no
mayor.
She has no roots in the Black community on the South Side that she could carry that kind of weight and make a difference. That her endorsement is like an anointment. That's not going to happen.
Right.
So if I were her, if I were advising her, I would say take the same position in the first district that you're taking with the other districts, and stay out of it.
Wow.
And you know too, you're right, Lynn. She needs votes on the South Side, but she may be in a very precarious position in her reelection campaign. She may need votes all from many parts of the city that she once did well in. So she's got to balance. She's got to balance a lot of things, and balance a lot of interests in terms of what her race is going to look like. So, and I think Delmarie's right. She doesn't want to look like she's picking and choosing endorsements in her own best interest. But Dave, what do you think? You have a thought on this?
Well, I think, I mean, in the election, it always comes down to who is she running against, and at this point, we don't know. I mean, Arne Duncan's name has floated out there some. We know her general unpopularity. I mean, and people have gotten just sort of a sense of how things have evolved in the city under her. I mean, the crime issue, I think, has really left her vulnerable in a lot of neighborhoods, especially in the north side, the south side. There's just no control to it, and so I think she has problems kind of at every level. I mean, except, as you point out at the opening of the show, Lynn, about budgetarily. I mean, the city's kind of in a rare period of time where it feels very unusual to have all the money that they do. But I just think that it's still early. We don't know quite what the dynamics are. We have to know who her opponent is. But Delmarie's analysis, I think, about staying out of it is not a bad one, because if she were to pick a candidate in the first district who flopped, I mean, that would not help her at all. And that's a big risk when you're running, when you've got multiple candidates and a lot of unpredictability in a race like that.
And also Pat Dowell is is an alderman.
One of her closest allies. She runs her budget committee in the council.
I was surprised when she told me that, because I don't see where, and she said, if I endorse, I'm going to go all in, I'm going to raise money, knock on doors. I just don't see why, since you're going to get someone angry at you, and especially if it's not clear who's going to win. See, in these big races, and this is true for governor, for anything, in Illinois primary, you just need a plurality to win. So the nominee could have 21, 22%, which is why, by the way,
exactly,
someone like Pat Dowell, who has a base, though much of her ward is not in the district. If you have a bit of a base, you go in maybe with a running start of 10 to 20, 12%. If you have something you could say is my people. So, and that could be, when we talk about a base, and we'll get to this in the governor's race, it could be an ethnic group, it could be geography, it could be gender, but you kind of want to say, I have a base, and be able to articulate who it is. It has to be someone other than people of the universe on it. Yeah, so anyway, I don't know why Lori Lightfoot said she wanted to do it. It will be really interesting if she gets involved in the third, where one of the people running there is Alderman Gal Villegas, who I guess she's had a relationship like this.
Yeah, and coming back to what Dave had said about who might run against her, and the old saying is you can't beat somebody with nobody. And right now, as far as I can see, Arne Duncan, who may very well get into the races, but he's the only name that I've seen, or personality, or political person I've seen, who would be able to stand toe to toe with her. And you're going to have a very crowded race, so it's not going to just be her and Arne Duncan. There's going to be a whole slew of people. Some of the also rans that ran last time will be back in, and others will run as well.
And Fran Spielman has a story out from her podcast where she did an interview with Stacey Davis Gates Union, and you kind of get a vibe there. And we had her on our show ages ago, where we identified her as a potential mayoral contender. And Fran's interview, it seems just to underscore that she may really be in the running. All this to say, we're already talking about 2023, and we have so much to talk about in 2022, Laura. Should we pivot to the governor's race, or Delmarie and Dave, do we have?
Let's pivot away, and that race got really very interesting this week, with especially on the GOP side, with the entry of Richard Irvin, the mayor of Aurora. A lot of excitement. Reporters, particularly reporters like us, are very excited, but he's not talking to anyone yet, strangely enough. He hasn't uttered a public word beyond his campaign video, etc.
Let me underscore that. This slate that he's with, no member of that slate, and they're all being organized by an interrelated group of Republican operatives. They have given no interviews. Now, the word is maybe Irvin will pick one or two, a few people to talk to on this, but you could call it, if you're from the Pritzker perspective, who is available, they have noticed that they've done this rollout of the entire slate on this. And I don't know if these are people that should, I guess, be expected to talk to.
Well, I'm wondering, Delmarie, what do you think as a political consultant? Would you advise your slate to take this strategy?
No, I mean, it's a little strange. It's different than I've seen before, and I certainly wouldn't advise it. I would make my candidate available. And of course, everybody would have done an interview with him, because everybody would have wanted to do an interview with him, because it's a fascinating premise. The fact that he's African-American, he's the mayor of Aurora, everybody thought he was a Democrat. He's now a Republican. I mean, there's so much to go at there and so much to tell. So everybody would have been chomping at the bit to do a story about him. But, and I always say that as a former reporter, if you don't talk to us, I'm still going to do the story. So you can either talk to me and get your side out, or you can see the story take shape without you. And then you've got to respond to it later. And so that's the position I think he's going to be in. He's going to have to respond to all these things, because there's going to be a story every day until he decides to come out and talk.
Well, David, do you think that the strategy, and these are Republican operatives, so who they are, all come out of the Kirk campaign, the Rauner administration. Some of them are very close to billionaire Ken Griffin, which is what everyone's waiting for to see if he signs on to all of the slate, especially Irvin. What do you make of how they're introducing the slate, and especially Irvin, to a state that really may not know him at all?
Well, I mean, it's still very early. I mean, I think, the primary is June 28th. So there's plenty of time, I think, for him to kind of go out and articulate himself. But don't you think part of the reason that Irvin is anointed as he was here, that it was because of he's kind of the mystery man. I mean, he's a guy with very little record in Aurora. I mean, he's a one-term mayor. There's just there aren't votes that you can point to. You got his voting record, of course, but he's a mystery. And you could sort of sense today, or it was yesterday, I guess, Governor Pritzker was asked about him, and you could sense a little bit of frustration about when is he going to come out in the open and talk? Because of course they're chomping at the bit for him to make, some sort of faux pas or whatever that they can build off of. But I think that they're going to be strategic in the way they roll this stuff out, and how he's made available. You figure there are going to be debates in this whole campaign, but I think, one of the reactions that I can't remember which outlet had it, but somebody talked to Jim Edgar about all of this. Yeah. And I thought it was really fascinating to hear Edgar's take on it, and how, Irvin is a former member of the Edgar Fellows, which is it's a group that Edgar has formed to kind of just, educate future generations of leaders and such. And Edgar said he was very impressed by Irvin during that time, but he sort of hinted that, Irvin might have trouble getting out of a primary. And I think the conventional thinking was that a guy like Darren Bailey, for whom there is a great deal of fervor once you go downstate south of I-80, is the odds-on favorite. I don't know. I mean, I think Bailey doesn't have money, and that's the difference here. Irvin has potential to have a lot of money, tens of millions of dollars thrown at him by Ken Griffin. By Ken Griffin, right. Absolutely, who was going to be all in on this. And so you figure that the airwaves are going to be blanketed here in the Chicago area and in the collar counties. But if you look at just the data from the 2018 Republican primary, if you exclude Cook County and the 5 collar counties, 53% of the primary vote is from, the rest of the counties downstate. And you figure that Bailey would have some advantage there. But I just have a lot of people down there who really, really like Darren Bailey.
So I so agree with you. So for everyone who's listening, he's a state senator, but he also comes out of the Trump wing of the Republican Party. He's closely allied with freshman Representative Mary Miller, who is a member in good standing of the Marjorie Taylor Greene wing of the Republican Party. And as we discussed in our earlier segment, she's endorsed by Trump. Her husband is a member of the Illinois legislature. And so here's why Bailey, if we had the primary today, would probably win. He's well known, and among the base, the people who will turn out, my analysis is he has an animated base, which could probably give him maybe even a national grassroots fundraising advantage. We'll see. And in a short time, we'll get Mary Miller did very well with small donors from all over the place because of, she's in that Marjorie Taylor Greene wing of the party. And now she has, can leverage the Trump endorsement. And when you have the Trump base, we know, even though it's a blue state in Illinois, there is a big number of people who are part of that. And that's why Bailey now has a running start in a primary where you could win with just 20-something%. So I don't know. So what does Bailey do then? Just stick around Northern Illinois and work the suburbs, or what, guys? What do you think?
You know what? I think if I were Bailey, I would start.
I meant Irvin.
What does Irvin do? Well, here's an interesting thing. I mean, that while Irvin himself has not been out making the rounds, I mean, there have been sort of, press contacts have been kind of circulating and introducing themselves and such.
Yes.
And when I had a conversation with one of Irvin's people the other day, the thought that crossed my mind was, well, what is Irvin going to say if you ask him about the 2020 election and whether it's legitimate? And that's sort of one of the litmus tests in the Republican primary, because all the Trump people, of course, are going to say it wasn't. And that, you could sense that they weren't quite ready to say anything about that yet. And who knows if they will. But I think if you're Irvin, you've got to be prepared to kind of dangle a little bit of that red meat to the audience downstate and get yourself down there and ingratiate yourself with them.
So I have a question for the three of you, because I am grappling with this. So I tried a version of that with one of Irvin's people and other Republicans. And when you ask who won the election, they'll say, well, we know that Biden is the president. But you see how artful that is? So I think that's the play. Is how do we as reporters and you as a consultant, I just have to figure out a way they see, so it kind of sounds like they answered the question. Biden is the president. That's not really, it's a good answer. But now
then they're going to, us reporters, us dogged reporters going to just keep asking that question because it's clear that it wasn't answered. And I think that's going to be something that's going to dog him throughout the campaign. If he's going to have to sell it one way or the other. And I don't know though that I agree that that's going to be a disadvantage for him to, maybe in Southern Illinois that is red meat that they don't believe that Biden is the president. But Northern Illinois in the suburbs and in the areas that you're talking about, Dave, in the Cook County suburbs and beyond. Most people believe that the election has been settled. So, there's advantages and disadvantages how he answers that question, but I don't think that reporters are going to stop until he answers that question.
That's why they probably haven't rolled him out right now.
Well, and I think the big question is, where will this primary be won? Will it be won in the collar counties, or will it be won downstate? And I think, Laura, I think you're absolutely right. I think Irvin stands a pretty good chance of doing pretty well in the 5 collar counties. And especially when you take into account if Ken Griffin is putting in these tens of millions of dollars that are likely, he's going to be blanketing the airwaves, and eventually people are going to know him. And you're dealing with a more moderate audience for the most part among Republican primary voters. And so is there enough there to be able to dominate the primary? And I think there could be, but downstate is still a force.
Sure. I want to get Delmarie in here to get her taken, and actually a follow up to that. Delmarie is Irvin and the slate appears to be playing on making crime a major issue. The J.B. Pritzker and Democrats in Illinois have been soft on crime. The crime is out of control. Dave mentioned the crime problems right here in Chicago. what's your take on whether or not that's a good strategy?
Well, Dave said actually everything I was going to say about the strategy, because I do believe that's the strategy, is that they're going after the collar counties. When you look at, and I know this was the general election, but Pat Quinn, he won governor by only winning 2 counties out of 102 counties. So it's not like it can't be done. It can be done. All you have to do is concentrate. And when you have the money to do the media buy and to tailor your message, for a lot of people, that's all they're going to know. And they're going to vote for him because they want to appear that they're liberal or whatever, or moderate or whatever. And but I do think in terms of crime, that is a number one issue on many people's minds right now. And it doesn't matter what the real reason is for it. The fact is that people feel ill at ease. They don't feel safe. They don't feel like they're feeling like they're a target. And that goes across the board. I don't care what color you are.
But he is. So here's what's going to happen, I think, as the weeks unfold. The reporters writ large in our journalism community are going to scrub Aurora, the record on crime, policing, the racial makeup of the police force. He is the mayor. We don't know if this is what he's running on. That city will figure prominently, I think, in a lot of the efforts to learn more about him. And he has a great bio: military, attorney, prosecutor in Kane County, prosecutor in Cook County, and mayor. Now, one of the things he did that I think has signaled alert to the right in his fundraising appeal, he talking about crime, he didn't quite say what a governor could do, but he said, I will remove liberal, or a word like that, prosecutors who let people out who they shouldn't. You can't, he must know, or his team must know, a governor cannot remove an elected official no matter their politics. Now, I think that was just a sloppy, unforced error, but it sure did send a message that had to be aimed at Cook County State's Attorney Kim Foxx. But Dave and Delmarie, do you think, we could fact check this thing all we want? Is it possible to run a campaign to the right and do it on a factually correct basis here?
Well, one of the things, most people don't know that. So people don't get into the weeds. You can say that, it sounds good, and they'll go for it. They don't know that the governor doesn't do it, or the mayor does it. They don't know that. So if it sounds good, they'll believe it. The other thing is, if I remember correctly, and wasn't the police chief of Aurora one of the candidates for police chief in Chicago?
I think that's true. It was a woman, correct?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, so, I think she's no longer, I think she's retired now, but yes.
Yes, so he can say, I had a police chief that was so good that even the city of Chicago wanted her.
Great line.
So, there are things, there are spins, and this is what I do. So I'm looking at how do you spin this to say that not only am I going to be tough on crime, but I'm a great leader in terms of identifying those who are effective on crime.
So he picked as a running mate someone I just never knew. She's in State House leadership, but I don't follow it. Dave, she is 29 or 30, Avery born, and she's supposed to be big up and comer. And what does she bring to the ticket?
Well, she brings youth. She brings, a firm downstate presence. She really was climbing the ladder really fast. At age 29, she's I think she may be the youngest member of that caucus, the House Republican caucus. She is a pretty forceful speaker too. I've heard her give floor speeches in Springfield, and she's a very, very persuasive speaker. So, she could be helpful to him, particularly downstate, particularly with women. Women, I think, are going to be an issue for Darren Bailey. I think the way this thing swings, besides crime, I think you have taxes. I think you have economy issues that are out there that that Irvin wants to exploit. There was a fundraising letter email that went out this afternoon where, I can't remember, I think taxes was number one on his list, a survey of people, what they thought about whether their taxes were too high. I mean, I think we know how people would vote on that, but he, I think he and Griffin probably are angling somewhat to build off the defeat of the graduated income tax amendment and point to that and say, this is what your governor, J.B. Pritzker, wanted to bring to you. He wanted to increase your taxes. And we've got 7% inflation and bacon is going up and cars are going up and everything like that. And that's going to be a very persuasive kind of argument that a lot of people will buy into. But back on Bailey, I think a real wild card with him is if he can somehow finagle an endorsement from Donald Trump, a tweet, a statement, anything, I think that could really throw this primary up for, it could just upend it.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think he's the one to watch more than others. So quickly, we're going a little overtime, everybody. I hope it's okay because we're having such a great discussion. But Jesse Sullivan hasn't picked a running mate. And he is, I don't know, again, viewers, so under the laws now, you have to run as a ticket. So you have to say, I'm running and here's who is my lieutenant governor. Everyone else picked somebody, he hasn't. So I called that campaign better get going on that. Otherwise, it's not a real campaign. The others running, former state lawmaker Shrimp, and I hope I say his last name right, Gary Rabin, where I don't even see where they could fit in and what their base is, given that you have Bailey looking at the far right and the Trump Republicans, and Irvin looking for, I guess, everybody else in the suburbs who doesn't want the Trump Republican candidate to be the nominee. What do you guys think?
Well, I think definitely Irvin is going for, he's modeling himself as the moderate. And since we have a history in Illinois of electing moderate Republicans, that's not far-fetched. And I think that's where he's going for sure.
Okay, well, on that thought, we're going to wrap it up. We are going to be having all these great discussions between now and June. Our next show is February 17th, so stick with us. And now, before we go, we need to sell some subscriptions to the Sun-Times. You could get a great monthly deal for our e-paper, which is an exact replica of the Sun-Times, and everyone knows I love it. First thing I do is read it in the morning. It's only $2.49 a month. It gives you unlimited access to the e-paper and every story. As you see on your screen, go to suntimes.com and subscribe. We've had a great show tonight. We thank Jonathan Karl for joining us in the beginning, Delmarie Cobb and Dave McKinney. Great conversation. And we've got so much more to unpack as these months come ahead. Thanks for joining us on this January show. See you next month.